Welcome to Litrescue, where we dive deep into the world of literature. Detailed chapter by chapter summary of Wuthering Heights. Chapter 1. Mr. Lockwood, the new tenant at Thrushcross Grange, visits Wuthering Heights, where he meets the mysterious and surly Heathcliff. The atmosphere at Wuthering Heights is gloomy and unwelcoming. Chapter 2. Lockwood returns to Wuthering Heights and meets other members of the household. The rude young woman, Catherine Linton, and the rough, uneducated Hareton Earnshaw. The interactions are tense and confusing for Lockwood. Chapter 3. Lockwood spends the night at Wuthering Heights and is disturbed by a ghostly apparition of a woman named Catherine. He learns that Heathcliff has a deep, troubled connection to this Catherine. Chapter 4. Nellie Dean, the housekeeper at Thrushcross Grange, begins to recount the history of the Earnshaw and Linton families, focusing on Mr. Earnshaw's adoption of Heathcliff and the immediate resentment from his son Hindley. Chapter 5. Mr. Earnshaw's favoritism towards Heathcliff causes friction between Heathcliff and Hindley. After Mr. Earnshaw's death, Hindley becomes master of Wuthering Heights and treats Heathcliff cruelly. Chapter 6. Catherine and Heathcliff grow close despite Hindley's efforts to separate them. Catherine visits Thrushcross Grange and meets the Linton siblings, Edgar and Isabella, beginning a shift in her affections. Chapter 7. Catherine returns from Thrushcross Grange, transformed into a refined young lady. Heathcliff, feeling inferior and rejected, begins to distance himself from her as she becomes more interested in Edgar Linton. Chapter 8. Catherine struggles between her love for Heathcliff and her attraction to Edgar. Heathcliff's resentment deepens as he watches Catherine grow closer to Edgar, who proposes to her. Chapter 9. Catherine confides in Nellie that she loves Heathcliff, but feels she must marry Edgar for social status. Heathcliff overhears part of the conversation, leading him to leave Wuthering Heights in despair. Chapter 10. Heathcliff returns after several years, now wealthy and determined to exact revenge on those who wronged him. He begins by wooing Isabella Linton and undermining Hindley, who has fallen into vice and debt. Chapter 11. Tensions escalate as Heathcliff manipulates Isabella and clashes with Edgar over Catherine. Catherine's health deteriorates as she becomes emotionally torn between the two men. Chapter 12. Catherine's mental and physical health worsens and she becomes delirious, haunted by memories of her childhood with Heathcliff. Heathcliff and Edgar are locked in a bitter rivalry. Chapter 13. Isabella writes to Nellie, describing her miserable marriage to Heathcliff. Catherine's condition improves slightly, but she remains emotionally fragile. Chapter 14. Nellie visits Wuthering Heights to see Isabella, who is now deeply unhappy. Heathcliff reveals his plan to gain control over both Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange. Chapter 15. Heathcliff and Catherine have a passionate and tumultuous reunion where they both express their undying love and torment. This meeting further deteriorates Catherine's health. Chapter 16. Catherine gives birth to a daughter, Cathy Linton, but dies shortly after. Heathcliff is devastated by Catherine's death and demands that her spirit haunt him. Chapter 17. Isabella flees from Heathcliff and later gives birth to his son, Linton Heathcliff. Hindley dies, leaving Wuthering Heights to Heathcliff, who continues his cruel reign over the household. Chapter 18. Years later, Cathy Linton grows up at Thrushcross Grange, unaware of her family's dark history. She eventually meets Linton and Hareton, leading to a series of events that bring the two families together again. Chapter 19. Cathy forms a bond with Linton Heathcliff, but Heathcliff uses Linton as a pawn in his revenge against the Linton family. Heathcliff forces Cathy to marry Linton to gain control over Thrushcross Grange. Chapter 20. Heathcliff's revenge reaches its peak as he gains ownership of both Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange. Linton dies shortly after marrying Cathy, leaving her trapped at Wuthering Heights. Chapter 21. Cathy and Hareton initially clash, but they eventually begin to form a bond despite Heathcliff's attempts to keep them apart. Hareton's rough upbringing under Heathcliff's tyranny complicates their relationship. Chapter 22. Kathy and Hareton's relationship improves, symbolizing hope and reconciliation. Meanwhile, Heathcliff becomes increasingly obsessed with memories of Catherine and begins to lose interest in his revenge. Chapter 23. Heathcliff starts to withdraw from the world, haunted by visions of Catherine. His obsession with her memory consumes him, leading to his mental and physical decline. Chapter 24. Heathcliff's health worsens and he becomes more erratic and unresponsive. He believes that Catherine's spirit is calling him to join her in death. Chapter 25. Heathcliff dies in Catherine's old room at Wuthering Heights. His death marks the end of his long, bitter quest for revenge, and he is buried next to Catherine. Chapter 26. The novel concludes with a sense of reconciliation and hope. Cathy and Hareton plan to marry and live at Thrushcross Grange, while Wuthering Heights is left to decay.